The room was silent as the Senate Judiciary Committee prepared to enter another grueling session. It had been a long week on Capitol Hill, full of fiery debates, tense negotiations, and an air of exhaustion so thick you could cut it with a gavel. But no one was prepared for what would happen next. What started as a clash of ideologies would explode into a moment no one would forget. Ted Cruz adjusted his tie and flipped through his notes with calm precision. He'd spent hours preparing for this testimony on digital censorship, anticipating every argument that might come from across the aisle. He knew Elizabeth Warren would be there, and he knew she'd come swinging. Warren, fiery and unyielding, entered the chamber like a storm. She had a reputation for being passionate, sometimes polarizing, but never dull. That morning, something about her demeanor was different. Her steps were sharper. Her gaze was steel. This wasn't just another debate to her, it was war. As the session began, the witnesses gave their opening statements. Senators took turns asking pointed questions, but tension began rising when Cruz made a bold claim that certain tech platforms were openly biased against conservative viewpoints. Silencing voices under the guise of community standards, Warren raised an eyebrow. She leaned forward, her hands clenched on the desk, and then, without warning, she interrupted. "That's rich, coming from a man who hides behind the Constitution when convenient." She snapped, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Senator Cruz, your defense of so-called free speech is nothing more than a shield to protect bigotry, misinformation, and hate." The room went still. Even the camera crews paused, sensing the moment was about to take a dramatic turn. Didn't flinch, but inside, a wave of emotions churned. He wasn't angry, he was disappointed. Disappointed that the discourse had devolved into accusations instead of arguments. Disappointed that his years of legal study and constitutional advocacy were being reduced to caricature. "I'm not finished," Warren said, rising from her seat. "Your words have consequences. People listen to you, and they're getting hurt because of what you defend. You might wear the Constitution like armor, but you forget that every right you preach comes with a responsibility you ignore." That's when it happened. Ted Cruz looked her straight in the eye. The room held its breath. He set down his pen, pushed his chair back slightly, and said one sentence that changed the tone not only of that session, but of the relationship between two of the Senate's fiercest rivals. "Senator Warren, if defending the Constitution makes me your enemy, then I will proudly be that every day of my life. But don't ever confuse passion with moral authority." A wave of murmurs spread through the chamber. Warren paused, the words hitting her harder than she'd expected. Not because they were cruel, there was no malice in his tone, but because they were true. The media would spin it a dozen different ways, clips would go viral. Commentators on both sides would analyze every syllable. But what the cameras didn't catch was what happened after the hearing ended. Warren approached Cruz in the hallway. For the first time in months, her voice was quiet. "Ted, you really believe you're doing what's right, don't you?" He nodded. "We all do, that's the problem. But we have to stop assuming the worst of each other." There was a long pause, the kind of silence that says more than words, and then she nodded to her. It didn't mean they would suddenly agree. It didn't mean there wouldn't be fierce debates in the future. But something changed. That day a sliver of mutual respect was born. Not for positions or policies, but for the heart each of them brought into the chamber. The story didn't go viral because of insults or drama. It went viral because of what it revealed. That even in the most divided corners of American politics, there's still a place for dignity, conviction, and the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. By the end of that day, Ted Cruz walked back into his office not with triumph, but with a quiet satisfaction. He hadn't humiliated Warren. He had reminded her and the nation of something we often forget. Conviction without compassion leads to division. But truth delivered with clarity and courage has the power to break through even the thickest walls. And that was the sentence. That didn't just end a debate, it started a conversation. The message, no matter how fierce the disagreement, no matter how far apart our beliefs may lie, there's always room for grace. The power of one sentence still, ivied with conviction. Not contempt can be enough to stop a storm in its tracks and plant the seeds of understanding in the most unlikely places.